I thought I was coming to a quiet town to start over. I thought I was just a woman with a small suitcase, a few savings, and one last chance to build a life that was finally mine. But the first time I saw Sheriff Dalton Reed standing in the middle of Main Street, smiling like the whole town belonged to him, I felt something cold in my chest. Because in that moment I understood something. This was not a town. This was a cage. And the man wearing the badge was the lock. My name is Claire Bennett. I came to Whitmore Hollow with one dream and one piece of land. That land had belonged to my mother's family for 3 generations. It wasn't much to look at from the road, just a wide stretch of quiet ground at the edge of town, with an old farmhouse, a broken fence, and trees that leaned over the back hill like they were trying to keep a secret. But to me, it was everything. It was the only thing my mother left me. She used to tell me, "One day, that land will be your fresh start. Don't let anyone take it from you." I held onto those words the way some people hold onto a prayer. So when the chance came to move there, fix the house, and open a small flower and gift shop in the front room, I said yes without thinking twice. I arrived on a bright Monday morning in early spring. The roads were empty, the sky was clear. The air smelled like rain that had not yet fallen. At first, the town looked peaceful. Too peaceful. A bakery with faded red paint. A diner with a cracked window. A church with white wooden walls and a bell tower that had stopped shining years ago. People stood behind curtains when I drove past. Men at the gas station watched me in silence. A woman holding grocery bags looked at my truck, then looked away so fast it was almost painful. I told myself I was being silly. Small towns can be suspicious of strangers. That was all. Then I met Sheriff Dalton Reed. It happened outside the county office. I was carrying a folder of papers, my rental agreement, my property transfer documents, and a box of keys. I was tired from the drive, nervous, and trying not to make a fool of myself in front of the clerk. Then a voice behind me said, "You must be the Bennett girl." I turned. He was taller than I expected, broad shoulders, clean uniform, cold eyes, the kind of man who didn't just enter a room. He occupied it. "Yes," I said carefully. "I'm Claire." He smiled, but it never reached his eyes. "Nice to meet you," he said. "I'm Sheriff Reed. Around here, it's best to introduce yourself before people get ideas." I remember that sentence exactly because it sounded like a joke. But it wasn't a joke. It was a warning. He glanced at my documents, then at my truck parked outside. "That old property on Hollow Road," he said. "Rough place to settle into. Lot of maintenance, lot of trouble. It belongs to me," I said. His expression didn't change. "Things belong to people on paper," he said. "Out here, sometimes paper gets real messy." Then he tipped 2 fingers to his hat and walked away. I stood there, holding my folder so tight my knuckles hurt. I should have left then. I should have packed my things and driven away while I still could. But people like me don't always learn the danger of a place until we are already standing inside it. That afternoon I went to the property. The house was older than I expected, but it was still beautiful in a tired kind of way. The porch creaked. The windows were dusty. A single tree stood near the well, twisting up into the sky like it had fought hard to survive. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The air smelled like old wood and thyme. My mother used to have a nightmare house when she was a little girl. She told me stories about running barefoot through the yard. That night, I sat on the floor in the empty living room and cried for the first time in years. Not because I was sad. Because I finally felt close to her again. I thought the hardest part of my life would be fixing the roof or painting the walls. I was wrong. The hardest part was the town. It started small. No one would sell me lumber. The hardware store said they were out. The bank delayed my small business loan again and again. The post office misplaced my permit application. And every time I asked a question, someone looked toward the sheriff's office before answering. The sheriff owns this town, I learned. Not officially, not on paper, but in every real way that mattered. He owned the court because the judge was his cousin. He owned the police because they wore his smile when he wasn't looking. He owned the county clerk because one phone call from him could make a file disappear. And he owned the people because he had taught them to be afraid. But fear is a strange thing. It spreads fast, and once it settles into a place, people start calling it normal. The first person to speak to me honestly was a girl named Nora. She worked at the diner, and she looked no older than 23. I sat in a booth near the back, trying to eat a piece of toast I didn't want. She came by to refill my coffee, and when she set the cup down, her hand shook. "Don't trust him," she whispered. I looked up. "Who?" She didn't even pretend not to understand. "The sheriff." Then she wiped the counter with a cloth that was already clean and said louder, "Need anything else?" Before I could answer, she walked away. That was my first real clue. The second came 2 days later. A man named Eddie from the local feed store finally agreed to deliver a few supplies if I paid cash. He was nervous the whole time, glancing over his shoulder like he expected someone to hear him through the phone. When he brought the order, he stood on my porch and said, "You should know something. The sheriff's family owns half the county through shell companies and fake liens. Anyone who gets in their way suddenly has a tax problem, a zoning problem, or a fire inspection problem." I asked him why he was telling me. He swallowed hard. "Because your land is next on their list." Then he left so fast he almost dropped the receipt. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at my kitchen table with a lamp on, and all my papers spread in front of me. Property deed, transfer records, old taxes, survey maps. Everything was clean. Everything was legal. And still, I felt like I was standing in the middle of a trap. The next morning, a notice was taped to my front door. It claimed there was a boundary dispute. It claimed part of my land was under county review. It claimed I needed to appear in court in 3 days. I stared at the paper until the words blurred. Then I laughed. A small, bitter laugh that sounded wrong even to me. They were coming for my land. Just like that. Not because they needed it. Because they could. I went to the courthouse. It was a small building with cracked stone steps and windows that reflected the sky like dead water. Inside, the judge sat high behind his bench, looking bored before the case even began. Sheriff Reed stood near the back with his hands folded and that same calm smile on his face. The lawyer appointed to me barely looked at my documents. The county attorney spoke in smooth, cold sentences about clerical inconsistencies, historical oversight, and the need to preserve local development priorities. Development priorities. That was what they called theft when they wore ties. I stood there and listened while they tried to turn my family's land into a line item. The judge barely let me speak. Every time I tried, he cut me off. At one point, Sheriff Reed even smiled at me like he was enjoying a private joke. Then the judge said the property would remain under temporary review and that I should not make any structural changes. In other words, they wanted me frozen, paralyzed, eager to make me give up. When I walked out of the courthouse, the sheriff followed me onto the steps. He leaned close enough that I could smell coffee on his breath. "You're stubborn," he said softly. "That can be expensive." I looked him in the eye and said, "My mother was stubborn too." For the first time, his smile faded. "Your mother should have known when to stay quiet," he said. Something in me went still. "Don't speak about her," I said. He shrugged. "People in this town forget things. Houses, names, families, history. It's easier that way." Then he walked back inside like he had already won. I wanted to scream. I wanted to break something. Instead, I stood there on the courthouse steps and made myself one promise. I would not beg, I would not run, and I would not fight this man the way he expected. Because men like Sheriff Reed love a loud fight. They love threats, shouting, anger, and visible weakness. They know how to handle that. But quiet, patience, proof, that was different. That was dangerous. I started listening. Not arguing, not warning. Listening. I learned that the sheriff's power did not really come from the town. It came from a man 2 counties over. A regional financier named Victor Hale. People whispered his name carefully, like saying it too loudly might bring weather through the walls. He owned banks, freight routes, land trusts, and pieces of other people's lives hidden behind layers of companies. Sheriff Reed protected the illegal businesses. In return, Victor Hale covered up the money, the records, and the pressure that kept the town obedient. It was a machine. And the sheriff was just the face on the front. I needed proof. Real proof. Not gossip, not rumors, documents. Something that showed Reed had been skimming money from Hale for years. Because corrupt men can survive a lot, but they do not survive betrayal from the person they steal from. So I stopped being the frightened outsider, and I became invisible. I wore plain clothes. I tied my hair back. I kept my head down. I learned the rhythm of the town. When the sheriff changed shifts, who used the back office? Which deputy drank too much at lunch? Which clerk slipped files into a blue folder instead of the gray one? I listened at the diner. I smiled at the gas station. I took notes in the margins of old receipts. And every night, I sat alone in my kitchen and built a map of power the way a detective might build a map of a crime scene. Then I found Nora again. She left work through the back door and nearly dropped her keys when she saw me waiting by the alley. "I'm sorry," I said quickly. "I didn't mean to scare you." She crossed her arms. "You shouldn't be here. I need help." She laughed once, but there was no humor in it. "No, you need to leave." "I can't." "Then you'll learn the hard way." I looked at her and said, "Do you want this town to stay this way forever?" She didn't answer. That was answer enough. I told her I wasn't asking her to fight. I was only asking for information. She stared at me a long moment, then said, "There's an old storage office by the freight depot. Nobody uses it anymore, but I've seen the sheriff's men there after dark. They don't take the front road." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. Her face tightened. "Because my brother disappeared after he asked questions. The air between us changed." "What happened to him?" She looked away. "They said he ran, but my mother still leaves his room the way it was." She handed me a key without saying another word. Then she walked away. That key was the beginning. The storage office was locked up and covered in dust, but the side window had a broken latch. I waited until midnight, then slipped inside with a flashlight and a heart beating hard enough to hurt. The place smelled like mildew and paper. Old ledgers sat in boxes marked shipping, equipment, and county maintenance. But underneath a loose floorboard, I found a metal file case. Inside were copies of invoices, coded payment slips, and handwritten notes between Reed's brother-in-law and a man working for Victor Hale's finance group. The numbers were strange at first. Then I saw the pattern. Money moved from land protection fees into fake repair accounts, then into private holding companies, then out again under names that had nothing to do with the sheriff or the town. But one page was different. It showed a diverted transfer. A payment meant for Victor Hale had been rerouted through a local account controlled by Sheriff Reed's family business. That wasn't just corruption. That was theft. Sheriff Reed had been stealing from the man who protected him. I read the page 3 times. Then I laughed softly in the dark because suddenly the whole thing made sense. He wasn't untouchable. He was just borrowing power from someone bigger, and he had gotten greedy. The problem was not whether he had enemies. The problem was that he didn't know one had already reached his own door. I copied everything, every invoice, every routing number, every signature. I photographed the papers with an old phone Nora had loaned me. Then I waited. The next part was the hardest. Not because it was dangerous, because it required patience. I had to make sure the evidence landed in the right hands. Not the sheriff's hands. Not the police. Not the town. Victor Hale's hands. I learned from Eddie that Hale visited the region twice a month and stayed at a private lodge outside the county line. He hated surprises. He hated public embarrassment. And most of all, he hated being cheated. That was all I needed. I did not call him. I did not threaten him. I did not write some dramatic letter. Instead, I waited until the night before his visit and placed the evidence in a brown envelope with a clean label and a simple message. For Mr. Hale. Urgent. Financial irregularities involving Sheriff Dalton Reed. Then I used the one person in town who still had enough courage to help me. Nora. She knew a driver who serviced the lodge, a quiet man with debts and no loyalty left to spend. For a price, he agreed to make sure the envelope was delivered directly to the private office, where Hale would review his papers. No one saw me hand it over. No one heard me speak. And that was the whole point. The sheriff had built his life on noise, threats, and public control. I was going to destroy him in silence. The next day, the town felt strange. Too still. Even the birds seemed to be watching. Sheriff Reed came into the diner just after noon. He looked calm at first. Then I noticed the tension in his jaw. His deputy stood near the door instead of taking his usual seat. The sheriff's phone rang twice. He ignored it. Then it rang a third time. He answered. He said only 3 words. "What are you saying?" His face changed while he listened. Not much, but enough. His smile was gone by the time he hung up. When he looked up, his eyes found mine across the room. For a second, we just stared at each other. And in that second, I knew. The envelope had been delivered. Victor Hale had opened it. Then the sheriff stood up slowly and walked outside without finishing his coffee. By evening, something was moving through the town faster than gossip. By sunrise, the county office was in panic. By noon the next day, Reed's name was being removed from everything. He wasn't arrested. He wasn't dragged into court. He was simply gone. That was how powerful people handle broken tools. They do not make a scene. They erase them. His badge was taken. His office was emptied. His deputies were told to stay home. His brother-in-law's business was frozen. The local judge suddenly claimed he was recusing himself from all related matters. The court he owned had abandoned him in a single night. And Sheriff Dalton Reed, the man who had made a whole town afraid to breathe, was forced to stand alone in the daylight with no one left to protect him. I found out later what happened. Victor Hale had seen everything. Not just the theft, but the betrayal. And Hale did not care that Reed had ruined my life. He cared that Reed had stolen from him. That was the mistake. Reed had thought he was part of a chain of power. He never understood he was just a link. And links can be cut. The day after Reed disappeared, I stood on my land and watched the sun rise over the trees. The county review was dropped within the week. The boundary dispute vanished. The paperwork was corrected. The records were restored. And just like that, the land was mine again. But it did not feel like victory at first. It felt quiet, heavy, like the kind of silence that comes after a storm has passed and you are still listening for thunder. Nora came by one evening with a box of old bulbs and a soft smile I had never seen before. "People are talking now," she said. I looked at her. "About what?" She shrugged. "About how strange it is that one man could scare everyone for so long." I almost laughed. "Yes," I said. "Strange. She helped me plant flowers along the front path. We worked in the dirt with our hands and did not say much for a while. Then she asked, 'Were you ever scared?' I looked at the house, at the windows, at the fence line, at the land my mother had loved before I did. 'Yes,' I said honestly. 'Every day.' She nodded. 'Good.' That surprised me. 'Good?' She brushed dirt from her palm and said, 'Fear means you understood the danger. It does not mean you were weak.' That stayed with me. Because the truth is, I was afraid. I was afraid when the sheriff threatened me. I was afraid in the courthouse. I was afraid when I went into that storage office alone. I was afraid every time I wondered whether I was too small to win. But fear did not save the sheriff. And fear did not stop me either. What saved me was something quieter. It was patience. It was observation. It was the refusal to let angry men drag me into their kind of battle. They wanted a fight they could win with intimidation. I gave them evidence. They wanted me to scream. I gave them silence. They wanted me to break. I let their own greed do the breaking for me. Months later, the town was still the same in some ways. The diner still served weak coffee. The church bell still rang at noon. The roads still cracked in the heat. But the fear had changed. People were beginning to speak again. Small things at first. A complaint at the post office. A challenge in the town meeting. A question at the courthouse. Just one question at a time. And that is how places heal. Not with one great heroic moment, but with people learning they do not have to bow forever. As for me, I opened the flower shop my mother always dreamed of. I painted the front room yellow. I hung dried lavender near the window. I kept the old family photo on the counter so I would never forget why I stayed. Customers came slowly at first, then more, then enough to fill the afternoons with light conversation and fresh cut stems. Sometimes people asked me how I managed to stand up to Sheriff Reed. I always tell them the same thing. I did not stand up to him. I stood around him. I let him keep looking forward while I moved behind the walls he never bothered to check. That was his mistake. He believed power was the badge. He believed power was the courtroom. He believed power was fear. But real power is knowing where the chain connects. And real revenge is not always loud. Sometimes it is just giving the right person the truth and letting a corrupt man choke on his own shadow. That's what happened in Whitmore Hollow. A sheriff ruled the town through fear. He tried to steal from a girl who looked harmless. And in the end, it was his own greed that buried him. Not with blood, not with a gun, with evidence, with silence, with the truth placed exactly where it needed to be. And every time I walk past the courthouse now, I remember something my mother once told me. Bad men always mistake quiet for weakness. She was right. Quiet is not weakness. Quiet is patience. Quiet is watching. Quiet is waiting. Quiet is the moment before the door opens and the truth walks in. And if you ever find yourself standing in a town ruled by someone like Sheriff Dalton Reed, remember this. Never fight the monster where it is strong. Find the hand that feeds it, and cut that off instead. Because sometimes the fastest way to destroy a tyrant is not to attack the throne. It is to expose the man behind it, and let him remove himself.